The first question is for Dr. Hofacre. Given the presence of quinolone antibiotic-resistant Campylobacter in the NARMS data, even after the removal of the drug from the production system, how do you measure success of a stewardship program in regards to antimicrobial resistance?
That's a real good question that I don't have an answer to. If I did, then I'd be a pretty famous person probably. We really don't understand fully how the antimicrobial resistance transfers, and actually picking up on the fluoroquinolone is the most difficult one, because that's not by transferable plasmid resistance, that's by a direct mutation. Campylobacters are inherently, especially coli, are inherently more resistant to the fluoroquinolones. Their DNA gyrase is less affected, and so that's a question that several researchers at FDA and researchers are trying to understand, is why has the Campylobacter resistance been maintained even without the pressure of use of any fluoroquinolone? And we just don't know that answer.
Thank you. For Dr. Lapara, are there studies regarding the impact of antibiotic-resistant organisms in headwaters, rivers, and the impact on fish habitat?
Are there studies? There certainly are. I would say at this point there's no agreement or consensus. Generally what goes on is people like me will do studies and then kind of try to have background control samples. And very few people have intentionally gone and done work like that. A few have gone to some fairly remote areas and found antibiotic resistance everywhere. Sorry, I'm sort of rambling a little bit. I would say this. Antibiotics, by one definition, fluoroquinolines don't fall into this, are natural compounds. They're produced by bacteria to kill other bacteria, so they've existed for a long time. There's a really nice study by some researchers in Canada where they went to Canadian permafrost, and so this is soil that has been frozen for 50,000 years, and they were able to find resistance genes for vancomycin. So there is always some background information or background level, but it's probably not well explored, I would say.
This is for Dr. Hofacre, but I think we can ask everybody on the panel to take a turn responding to this. Skeptics have suggested that Directives 209 and 213 will allow producers to use antibiotics for growth and simply call it prevention. You indicated subclinical disease prevention will be lost as growth is eliminated. Will the use of antibiotics to prevent disease increase? And will the overall use of antibiotics in poultry or in other species go up or down after the implementation of these directives, in your opinion? Why don't we start with Dr. Hofacre, but I think everybody can weigh in on that.
Well, I can't predict the future. Wish I could. If I did, I probably wouldn't need to be sitting here. That's a question that regulators and consumer groups have asked me and have asked the food animal producers. Are we going to see greater therapeutic use, and how do you know that antibiotics are going to be used in a judicious manner and not just continue to be abused? I think having veterinarians involved is the reason that we're not going to see an increasing usage. You're going to have that veterinary client-patient relationship required. And for me personally, if someone asks me to write a prescription, I'm not going to do it just because I think they want to do it, use that antibiotic. in a way other than how it's intended to be used, and that is to prevent a disease. And I suspect that 99.9% of the veterinarians are going to look at it in the same way. So I believe that that the veterinarian is going to be in the position to have control over that and prevent the usage other than what it should be used for as a disease prevention. And if you look at the labels of the antibiotics that are going to remain on the market that have growth promoting labels, when the growth promoting portion of that label goes away, a lot of them have duration indications. And so that, again, is going to be, rather than people thinking that antibiotics are used and are going to just continue to be used as they've always been, I think that label indication for preventative or for treatment is going to prevent that. And our use survey will hopefully let us know. That's why we want to start it now in 2015 and early 2016 before guidance document 209 and 213 kick in, so we can say, oh, here's the baseline of antimicrobial usage in poultry. Then once they kick in, we'll be able to see what the trend becomes.
I'm going to pass on that one.
Well, I agree with everything Chuck said there. I think the veterinary role in that and that relationship from a producer perspective will be very important. We've been very, very clear in our communications and education of producers that come the end of 2016, it will be illegal to use growth promotion for those medically important antibiotics if the label does no longer exist. So that message is very clear to them. And then working with their veterinarian, I have confidence that the veterinarian will use it appropriately as per the label. In general, I don't have the number off the top of my head, and Mike Apley is here somewhere, I'm sure, but in the study with the American Association of Swine Veterinarians on the in-feed estimates, growth promotion in general was a much smaller percentage of the use of antibiotics. So in terms of those changes, I don't know that we will see a huge amount. If we do see animal illness as a result of that, of course, then therapeutic uses, treatment uses may go up, and that's a concern with potential loss of preventative use as well.
I don't know how much more I can add to that. I guess my prediction would be that indeed I think antibiotic use will decrease over time, just in the next few years. From the beef side, when those first guidances came out, the Academy of Veterinary Consultants happened to be meeting in Washington, D.C. the same week. I think it was Guidance 209 came out. And Bill Flynn was a speaker at that meeting, and I happened to be the program chair, so I got the opportunity to ask the veterinarians in the room how many of them were aware of or were promoting use of CTC, OTC in the feed for growth promotion, and there wasn't a hand in the room that went up. Now, these are primarily feedlot veterinarians, so the growth promotion thing, if we're looking on the beef side for a substantial decrease in antibiotic use by eliminating the growth promotion level, I don't think we'll see that. But I think overall the veterinary community will get together and do a much more aggressive job of policing their clients.
Thank you. Next question for Dr. Lapara. What proportion of the genes that are detected are still viable or capable of causing disease in humans? Can you estimate what effect that has on human health?
Well, that's an easy one. No. All of the genes are, that's a good question, one that I worry about a lot. I think in most microbial systems, unless something is there to harm them, those genes are probably in living creatures and viable and can be transferred. They could be in pathogens. They could be in benign organisms. I think in some of the systems where we intentionally try to kill organisms, such as some of the treatment technologies I talked about, those could be free-floating pieces of genetic material that just hasn't really cycled back. And what that means to me is I think some of my estimates on the decay rates are actually underestimates. And actually this genetic material has gone away much further. An example of this is when we've, I didn't show this data, when we have pasteurized sewage sludge. So in theory it's all dead. We can still measure it. And then when we apply it to soil, it all disappears very quickly within a week. And so we think then at that point it's just being cycled into sort of the regular soil microbiology. So it's a good question and one we worry about, but I don't have an answer.
Okay. The next question is for Dr. Koeman. Dr. Hofacre's quoted surveys about antibiotic use and resistance in poultry. Does the National Pork Board conduct similar surveys to assess current use or whether stewardship programs are effective in reaching the goals of more responsible use?
So we have what I just referred to, the paper that Dr. Apley worked on with the American Association of Swine Veterinarians, which looked at in-feed antibiotic use in the swine industry, which was really I think one of the first across industry looks at the amount in feed. We're going to repeat that coming up. We've just started discussions on repeating that, and that was also in part with USDA. So repeating that so we can have a look at that, and I think that's really a good baseline for that. As we move forward, certainly with having Dr. Davies working with us on the models and metrics, that will allow us to look at monitoring antibiotic use and better understanding how it is used through the PQA Plus programming. We have, obviously, the antibiotic stewardship is part of that as well.
Thank you. This is a question, I think, for all of the panel. It's Dr. Hofacre, but I think we can expand it and have everybody respond. Dr. Hofacre, you mentioned the problems that they're having in Europe with decreased production and problems with raising poultry there. Do you see a similar risk in the United States as antibiotic use is decreased?
Well, I think it's easy to say that it's easy to look at the numbers and say that the production of farm animals in Europe is declining and blame it on one thing or another. But I think it's probably a combination of some of the animal welfare regulations, the environmental regulations, the use of antimicrobials. There's, one of the, and this is just my opinion, is that the greater amount of regulations that are placed upon animal production, people are still going to eat. They're still going to want food. And if it costs a whole lot more to get their food from the U.S., then we may look elsewhere at a cheaper source of food. That's all I was saying. Not necessarily is it all about antibiotic resistance, but I think I think it's a good thing that we have a market driving the decisions on antimicrobial use for poultry anyway, rather than it being regulatory driven. That was the point I was trying to make.
Anybody else want to comment on Europe versus the U.S. or? Okay.
Don't want to get into that quagmire.
This is for Dr. Sjeklocha. I got a couple of similar questions, so maybe we can expand this one as well after you address this specific problem. After BVD PI removal and PTI programs, what are the other management changes that you see with the potential to improve antibiotic use?
Well, I think we test and remove for BVD PI at arrival at the feed yard because we have to. The rancher, the cow-calf side of it, has not fully grasped the removal of persistently infected cattle. that needs to happen as far as I'm concerned. That's where it needs to occur. Not only will it help at the feed yard level, but it will also help the producer at his level. There's, for whatever reason, it can be, there are a multitude of them given, but we haven't gotten people to precondition their calves. I haven't done a good job of getting that done. Some of them will tell you that they're looking for a premium when they sell their calves at the livestock auction. And then you ask them, well, what do you consider a premium? And they can't really answer that. A premium is probably just the lack of a discount, but they are probably getting a discount by not preconditioning their calves. So disease prevention, I think, those are two key issues, I think, that we need to establish industry-wide, not just at the feed yard level. We have a lot of cattle out in the country, here in the southeast, in fact, that, quite frankly, the guys that own those cattle are not serious cattlemen. They own a piece of ground, and I say this because I did part of my growing up in Missouri, and there was a lot of these guys there. They had a job in town. That was their main source of income. They liked to, for instance, deer hunt. So they had a patch of timber that they bought, and they live out on that patch of timber. If they didn't have a few cattle out there to graze down the grass would be too tall to walk through when they went deer hunting that fall. And so they buy something that has 4 legs and moves, and they call that a cow, and they buy something that has 4 legs and moves and has a pair of testicles, and they call that a herd sire, and they market that animal at a convenient time for them. It might be for Christmas shopping, but there's really not a lot of control. Now, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of really, really good cattlemen, even in the southeast. I've kind of picked on them here, but even the southeast has some excellent cattlemen. But the majority of our herd are owned by people that don't take it as seriously, at least as I think they should. So there's the caveat.
So there are a couple of these questions along the same lines, I think, for Chuck and for Jennifer and for Dave as well. You mentioned some of this, but what are the barriers to implementing the better management practices that you've all talked about? What are the obstacles to achieving that over the next few years?
Well, I think some of it is communication. I write a column in Beef Magazine. Dr. Apley and I and Dr. Mark Hilton take turns writing a column in Beef Magazine. And I believe it's 93% of the beef cattle herds in the United States are under 100 head. And in order to get a free subscription to Beef Magazine, you have to have at least 100 head of cattle. So unfortunately, 93% of our cattlemen are not getting the benefits of Dr. Apley and my wisdom. But I think that's a big key there, is just getting the word to some of these people, and perhaps creating a whole new cow-calf business model where herd operators can work together to select for better genetics, market cattle in a way that is in larger groups, so it brings in more money for each of them, that sort of thing. But one of the challenges is that just getting the word to a lot of these guys that, like I say, are probably more interested in deer hunting or something else, or just want to say they own cattle so they can put on a hat once in a while. I'm trying to be. That's a little sarcastic, but there is some truth to that. So, anybody else?
Barriers in the other industries?
Sure. So I did in my talk identify one of our challenges that we said, had room for continuous improvement was our record keeping, and that is part of our research call to look at what some of those behavioral aspects may be to improve that. But I think I might look at that question a bit of a different way, because I think there actually has been a lot of management practices that have already changed or improved how we've used antibiotics, and we've had this discussion internally a lot that they're really indirectly doing it, and we're not even really knowing, whether that's ventilation that's improved the health, moving pigs inside in some areas, and those things have reduced the need to use antibiotics, and there's a whole plethora of other ones. I think maybe getting back to what David said was looking at what those are and communicating those more widely so that people recognize that they are improvements and can implement them as well. So looking at our research, and that's certainly an effort we're trying to go across our different disciplines within and identify what those are and share them more widely.
One of I think when I talked with the news media, or if I talk with consumer groups, or last week I even talked with a group of chefs in Charlotte, North Carolina, they all think that they have this idyllic concept of farming, and they don't realize that farming is a business, and that if you don't make money in your farming operation, you're not going to be in that business. They understand that about the little grocery store down the road, that they need to make money to stay in business, but they don't recognize that in farming. And so in agriculture, we have utilized antibiotics as a tool to be profitable, and as we have those, we don't use them any longer, we're going to find other tools to prevent the things that the antibiotics were doing. And so I think one of the big challenges for animal agriculture is to do research for us to find ways, either by husbandry practices or some of the new like organic acids, or some of the botanicals, different things that can help minimize enteric health issues, especially for poultry. So I think research is going to need to be done to help us find ways to grow animals in a profitable way and maintain their health. It's not appropriate to not treat animals that are sick. So I don't see that we're going to not have treatment, but I think some of the disease preventions that we were using the growth promotants for, we need to find some alternatives.
Thank you. I'm not going to let Dr. Lapara off the hook. Very similar question for you. And I want to compliment the questioner here who's using the term moderators from yesterday's breakout session. What are the barriers or moderators or hurdles to implementing the newer technologies that could reduce the burden of ARGs in wastewater?
I would say the main barrier are twofold. First one is it's easier to do nothing than it is to do something. The second one is a lack of regulations. The municipal wastewater treatment industry is largely a government group that is regulated by a different government group. And at this point, the regulations don't consider antibiotic resistance at all. They do consider pathogens, and so there are some parallels there, but the regulations for pathogens are really weak for a very obvious reason. Somebody was talking to me during the break and talked about the fact that a wastewater person doing some training claimed that their wastewater, when treated correctly, was drinkable. And I immediately frowned. Don't drink wastewater. It's not meant to be consumed. So, I mean, we can make them more stringent, but in some cases, the main driver is just what we've been doing. The newer technologies aren't necessarily going to be much more expensive. They are used, and they can be used, and they can be used cost effectively. So There's no real good answer for that one.
Thank you. Dr. Hofacre, how much problem do you foresee from backyard chickens and exotic bird ownership in efforts of the poultry industry to achieve stewardship goals?
Just a little bit along the same lines as the deer hunting. I think that I don't know how to even answer that question, because the folks that are doing a lot of the backyard chickens, they're pets, and so the impact of that on a family is going to be, if they use any antibiotics, if they need to use antibiotics on just that family, and it's not going to be much different than a dog or a cat that gets sick and you have to treat them with an antibiotic. So I don't know how. I think that's such a small part of the equation. I don't know that it's even worth thinking about.
Okay, thanks. For Dr. Koeman. Dr. Koeman, you discussed research priorities for 2016. What has been driving the evolution of interest in research on antibiotic resistance for the pork board?
Well, we've had a really long history. I didn't show a graph, but it went back to 2000. I'm thinking back because I presented it last week, of our antibiotic research priorities, and we've always had it as part of the budget. I think original drivers have always been that producers want to use it responsibly. It's always been important to have it available for animal health, but also for public health, particularly because it comes through my committee and our focus is on producer and public health. So that's always been a piece of it. It also, they want to be able, as it runs a business, use it efficiently, because again, it's one tool within there. I think as we're continuing onwards and there's different pressures from consumers, from retailers, from the marketplace, that plays into what's driving our antibiotics. And like I said, this year, I think the years since I've been there, we've always had input on our priorities established through having subject matter experts and having our external stakeholders. But we've certainly, in the last couple of years, really tried to engage a variety of audiences to feed into what those priorities are.
Thank you. Dr. Sjeklocha, 2 questions. One, describe metaphylaxis, and the second is, what was the source of your data that you showed on antibiotic use?
Metaphylaxis is when you anticipate that the cattle that are in your pens are going to have a fairly severe break of, in this instance, respiratory disease. And so when you process the cattle and vaccinate them and everything, you add an antibiotic to that. There are several antibiotics that are labeled for metaphylactic use, and so that's what metaphylaxis is. The source of our data is it's a third party. It's a commercial company. I'm really not at liberty to tell you the name of the company that has the data, but I imagine anyone in here that's feed yard oriented probably recognize that chart. But I'm really not at liberty to name the company. They let me share the data, but they ask that I not name the company. So, and that's not because they're trying to keep anything secret. It's just that there's other feed yards data included in that. So
sometimes we have to ask tough questions.
Yep.
And this is, it says Dr. Hofacre, but I think everybody needs to weigh in on this. Do you believe animal welfare will ever be compromised by customer policies and priorities? And are vets concerned about fulfilling their oath for animal welfare in the midst of antibiotic-free pressures?
That's a really good question, because I've had that asked of me as the executive for the poultry veterinarians, that we have those discussions, and that risk exists. The market pressure would be, antibiotic-free broiler meat is much more valuable, and it can sell it at a higher price than those that aren't antibiotic-free. And so a company that is 100% antibiotic-free marketing, if a flock becomes sick and needs to be treated, there's a lot of pressure to not treat them. I think it's really the pressure is on each individual veterinarian to make that decision. And I don't know that one of the things that is very common for most of these antibiotic-free programs is they're married to an animal welfare program. So it's very uncommon to not see some other kind of certification besides antibiotic-free. So they're going to be American Humane Association or one of the other certifications for humane use. And so in those programs, you also have if animals become sick, you must treat them. So I think those combined, there's not as great a risk that companies would try to treat once guidance documents come in, and it's required that a veterinarian write a script. Then I think you're going to see that becomes less of a fear.
So all our species are very different, and in the swine industry, those antibiotics that are approved for use, the majority approved for use to treat our illnesses are those that are medically important to human health. So movements or pressures to go antibiotic-free, yes, potentially have an impact, a huge impact on animal welfare or swine health in the industry. Even those in antibiotic-free systems right now have the option, in most cases, to treat the animals and go through a different, send them through a different tract that's not part of that antibiotic-free flow. Should that go away, then we have sick animals that we can't treat. And for the pork industry, and we've had certainly as well a lot of discussions about this and with the retailers and those where those pressures are coming from, that it's not an option to not be able to treat an ill animal. And that's certainly, I'm speaking for the veterinarians because that was part of the question as well. So for the swine veterinarians, that it certainly is a concern for them too, that they need to be able to have the ability to treat an ill animal.
I think the antibiotic-free market would pose a real problem in the beef industry. Poultry and pork industry is a lot more vertically integrated. It would be very challenging to do that. I've been involved with some feed yards as clients that fed some of these natural programs that never, ever had antibiotics, and it was challenging. In those few instances, yeah, we were fairly aggressive on getting the animals that needed treatment, but it is a concern for me as well that if that premium is there, there's certainly impetus to wait and see for just a minute, see how we can get along. But there are some natural programs out there that have the never ever label for beef, and they do seem to enjoy a premium. But like some of the restaurants that have tried to go antibiotic free, they really struggle to get that supply. And so from a veterinarian's perspective, I think especially in the beef industry, it would be pretty difficult to really manage an antibiotic-free beef operation, especially at any kind of a large scale. So.
Thank you. Dr. Hofacre, are coccidiostats considered ionophores, or are there different classifications based on structure and function? And if they are ionophores, what methods are available for RWA statements on products?
So the ionophores are a class of coccidiostat. There's also a class of coccidiostats that have just been termed the chemicals, which are non-fermentation produced chemical coccidiostats. So amprolium would be one that most everyone across all the food animal species would be aware of. So amprolium is a chemical coccidiostat. It's not an antibiotic. It's not classified as an antibiotic. It's not a fermentation fermentation product. So those chemicals, coccidiostats. So a company that is on an antibiotic-free label can legally use a chemical anticoccidial. They cannot use the ionophore because ionophores, by definition, are antibiotics. I think of.
Very good. Dr. Lapara, in your opinion, could on-farm digesters that exist primarily to produce energy also have impacts on antibiotic resistance in agricultural discharge?
Yes, absolutely. So most of those on-farm digesters, I'm guessing, are going to be operated at human temperature. The work we've shown, the work we've done so far has shown actually fairly good decay of resistance. If you use more of the methane produced to heat it even hotter, I would expect them to achieve even greater rates of decay. So a lot of what I've talked about for the treatment of human sewage would actually apply to agriculture, assuming they're sort of the equivalent of a sewer infrastructure. So collecting the material can be the real challenge. So I can't imagine cattlemen who like to hunt deer collecting piles. That's just really not feasible. But other systems, I think would work.
Again, I think this is one that several of the panelists can weigh in on. What are the current antibiotic resistance panels in poultry or swine or beef, and what trends of those pathogens are similar to medically important pathogens in humans?
Say that again.
I mean, what are the antibiotic resistance patterns and trends in pathogens of medical importance to poultry? I think the question is, are you seeing resistance patterns in poultry pathogens that are similar to those in human pathogens?
Well, I think in the first place, we don't necessarily look at. So, for example, one of the concerns would be methicillin-resistant Staph aureus or vancomycin-resistant enterococci. We don't monitor enterococci and we don't monitor staph as a routine in poultry because those CDC is very often and done a very good job of stating that MRSAs and VREs are a hospital-associated issue, and it's not necessarily associated directly with food animals. However, we do monitor for resistance in those bacteria that could infect a human and transfer resistance genes, and that's Campylobacter and Salmonella in poultry. And so we do look for the NARMS panel that on the sensititer plate does look for those antibiotics that are medically important for humans. And so, that data is there. The original NARMS work that started in '96 is all available, and our work will eventually be published once we have a trend of the on-farm part.
You want to?
So I'll echo that, looking at the salmonella and looking at the NARMS trends and profiles. And, you know, if something does come of concern or something's emerging or something's new, you know, typically we'll reach out and have our communications. For instance, earlier this week, before the start of this meeting, we met with the Centers for Disease Control, and I think several people are in this room who were in that meeting. And that's something we try to do on an annual basis, related to those topics at the interface of pigs and people, and discuss in things that are emerging, what are some research needs or gaps and ways we can collaborate to better understand, both for the industry, because we don't want it in swine either, and as it relates to public health.
I'll try this one.
Thank you.
So I think the question in some ways assumes that we have really good surveillance of what's going on with humans, which I think is probably weak also. We did it. One of my collaborators was tracking a specific plasmid that's known to cause disease or is found in organisms that cause disease in cattle, and you know, sort of one of these snarky conversations over a beer, which is, we've never seen it in humans. Can you track it in sewage? And so we invented a technique to track it, and sure enough, it's there. So we really don't have a good grasp on that at all. I think that speaks to the need for more surveillance on both human medicine and animal agriculture.
Thank you. Anybody else want to comment? All right. The last question, and then we're going to wrap up. Reduction in antimicrobial use may or may not resolve or improve the negative outcomes associated with antibiotic resistance. If we go ahead and withdraw or reduce antibiotics in animals and humans, and the rate of resistance doesn't go down, what do we do then?
Well, I think you can look at Baytril when enrofloxacin was removed from the market in the United States. The level of fluoroquinolone resistance in campies, it declined somewhat, but then it came back up again. So you can't predict the future. You don't know what's going to happen. There's so many other things occurring with antimicrobials that we don't understand, and their interaction with bacteria and interaction with other chemicals. If you look at a paper that was published in Denmark on pigs with zinc and high zinc, when the growth promotants were removed, they increased the level of zinc in the diets because there's an antimicrobial effect of higher zinc on health, and resistance actually increased. So there's linkages of these heavy metals, there's linkages of disinfectants. There's a lot of things we don't understand about antimicrobials and antimicrobial resistance that we'll learn over time.
Anybody else want to weigh in?
So what do we do then? There's an appetite for protein out there. We'll figure out a way. If we get to the point where antimicrobials are either useless or can't be used, however that gets, I'm sure we'll figure out a way. I don't know what that is. Again, it's tough to predict the future, but I guess that's one of the beauties of this industry, protein production, is that we can be pretty creative.
If you want.
I don't have the answer to what we'll do then. I think that sort of hits the nail on the head as the concern as we move forward. What are those public health outcomes or unintended consequences? And it just sort of highlights in using sound science or thinking through what those changes are, what those drivers are, and what those consequences and the outcomes might be, or what we will do next.
Yeah, I teach a science class to non-scientists, and it's a very politicized course, intentionally so. And I always give the bias that I give my upfront bias. I'm not necessarily liberal or conservative or even moderate. I'm a scientist. I'm really arrogant about science and engineering, and I think we will find a way. Maybe it's out of desperation, but there's a lot of factors, and there's a lot of people, and there's a lot of people pursuing different factors. And I think it's probably not one magic bullet, but it might be 40 or 50 little silver bullets. So I think we'll find a way.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for asking tough questions, and thanks to our panelists for having the courage to answer those tough questions.